I wanted to flesh out an idea that I mentioned last night in a video about another body of voters who would have a final say on all legislation that's passed by both houses and signed by the president. Basically, a check and balance, given the fact that we know that our government, our entire government, both state and local and federal, are all corruptible. That the legalization of buying politicians has corrupted our entire government, and so they don't act in the interests of the electorate anymore. They're selected by money in the primary process, and they're entirely compromised by campaign funding needs and potentially blackmail. So we have been missing a check and balance in our government now. There was a time when the checks and balances put in place by the founders were sufficient, but that time has passed, and so it's time for a new check and balance. I mentioned two checks and balance actually, and since we're just in fantasy land, I'm just going to riff on it. One of them would be consequences for politicians who vote for and roll out unconstitutional legislation. So like, they're sworn to protect the Constitution, and if they violate that oath by passing a bill that's later found to be unconstitutional, they should have a sanction against them. Like, they should lose their office and then be ineligible for re-election because they're either too stupid to understand that they've passed an unconstitutional piece of legislation, or they're just an enemy of the Constitution by virtue of voting for it. As it is now, it's like our rights are perpetually up for grabs by legislators. Like, they pass all of these unconstitutional pieces of legislation, and like the judicial branch is like the only goalie we have to stop them, and it's just a matter of time before we end up with a Supreme Court that's entirely unconstitutional and just basically dismantles the republic. So that's one line of defense, is for there to be consequences for enacting unconstitutional laws, that legislators would go into that process of introducing legislation and voting on it with the understanding that their seat would be at risk, and therefore they would have a reason to be careful and consider the constitutionality of everything on which they voted. Because the Bill of Rights articulates not privileges that we have given to us by the government, but inalienable rights that shall not be infringed upon. And yet, over the decades, the Bill of Rights has been thoroughly compromised. You can pick just about any one of them and see how they've been watered down and diluted. So that's one. And then the other one was kind of a jury duty system, where you have people who get the final say on every piece of legislation, and they aren't career politicians. So they would be like people who pass some kind of civil service exam to show that they're competent and understand the Constitution. It would be like a body of jurors, and maybe there'd be one for each state. And then they're picked at random. And so like, if you are a person in this pool and you get picked, you have a certain length of term, and you are anonymous. So nobody knows who you are except for, say, the Secret Service, who they come and visit you, and maybe they give you a certain kind of like set of software, encrypted app or something, that gives you the ability to look at each piece of legislation. So you would basically be sequestered. Maybe you stay in your own home, and then you would get a stipend that would support you so that you don't have to, work a 9 to 5 while you're trying to do this, because there's a lot to review. But basically, no legislation would get to you until after the president signs it into law, and then there's one final review by this body of selected, like, constitutional jurors, and there has to be some majority vote for it to ultimately pass into law. And if it didn't, it would be final. It would be killed. So they would be anonymous, so they couldn't be lobbied, and perhaps they could be given some kind of AI tools that would give a synopsis of the bill and even maybe compare it to the Constitution. Like, I'm sure AI would actually be pretty good at giving kind of an objective view of a big piece of legislation. It could read the whole thing in moments and then create a synopsis and then compare it to the actual Constitution to give sort of an opinion on its constitutionality. They could have that kind of a tool to aid them in that. But it's almost like it being a Nielsen family or something. You know, Nielsen families, it was like a TV rating system where you would be part of a pool of people who would then like rate TV shows, and it was a sample size. But like I said, with this, it would be like a jury duty type service, and you couldn't be lobbied, and your life would kind of be overseen and protected by the Secret Service. You'd be sacrosanct in a way, and you would be the final line of defense against corruption, because we clearly lack a certain check and balance, like the direction the country is going in. I think most people believe that the country is not going in the right direction, that the will of the people is not being represented by the people in office, and it's kind of at all levels of government. It seems like everybody is feathering their own nests, and there needs to be a way to stop it. So this is more detail on this idea that will obviously never come to pass, but just riffing on another couple of checks and balances that I think would be helpful in the face of the changes that have brought our government into corruption and completely disconnected it from the will of the voters. It's like there's nothing we can do, because people say we can't vote our way out of this. We haven't been able to even enact term limits on career politicians. So it's a serious problem.